I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
Without UNRWA, the delivery of food, shelter, healthcare, education, amongst other things, to most of Gaza's population would grind to a halt.
Alarm from the UN as Israeli lawmakers vote to ban the agency that provides critical aid for Palestinians.
It is possible to have a different relation between Cuba and the US and not this direct confrontation.
Renewing calls to end a US-imposed embargo on Cuba. A conversation with the island's ambassador. Building a workshop for peace. A look at the groundbreaking design and construction of UN headquarters. Next.
The tense situation in the Middle East tops the agenda here at the UN.
If UNRWA is unable to operate, it'd likely see the collapse of the humanitarian system in Gaza. UNICEF would become effectively unable to distribute life-saving supplies. Here I'm talking vaccines, I'm talking winter clothes, I'm talking hygiene kits, health kits, water and sanitation, RUTF on malnutrition, and we know, again, we're knocking on the door of famine, and all range of nutrition supplies. So a decision such as this suddenly means that a new way has been found to kill children.
Strong warnings from UN officials as the organization's relief agency for Palestinian refugees faces a ban in Gaza and the West Bank. Monday, Israel's legislature approved a bill that would prohibit UNRWA from operating inside Israel and another that prevents Israeli officials from having contact with the UN agency. The ban is expected to go into effect in 3 months. The move has been met with strong criticism and dire concern for the impact it will have on Palestinians who depend on UNRWA for basic needs. Mitch McCann has details.
Israel's decision to ban the United Nations Relief and Works Agency from operating within its borders has drawn widespread condemnation from the international community. Moments before the Security Council convened in New York Tuesday morning, Israel's permanent representative to the UN, Danny Danon, sought to defend the decision. Danon used a printed image to show what he said proved UNRWA workers were also operating as terrorists for Hamas.
These vile scandals cannot be swept under the rug any longer. This Council, the international community, and the entire UN must confront the fact that UNRWA Gaza is beyond redemption, beyond reform, beyond any justification. We must turn the page now.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said in a statement the implementation of Israel's new laws on UNRWA could have devastating consequences for Palestinian refugees and would be detrimental for ending the conflict. The Secretary-General's statement was supported by the Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process at the Council, Tor Wennesland, who noted the death toll of more than 42,000 Palestinians in Gaza and 230 UN staff. Palestine's permanent observer to the UN took aim at other members of the Council, who he chose not to name, accusing them of standing by while Israel continued to commit crimes.
Will you allow Israel to dehumanize us further as part of its attempt to erase us? Will you? Will Israel succeed in making the destruction of the Palestinian people, starting with northern Gaza, acceptable to you? Or at least convince you it is inevitable and there is nothing you can do about it?
China's permanent representative advanced China's demands for a peaceful resolution, calling for a ceasefire without delay, while blasting the UNRWA ban.
Closing the agency would be a new round of collective punishment of millions of Palestinian refugees in the region and would severely affect the humanitarian situation, security, and stability in the region.
Israel says it stands with its international partners to ensure it can continue facilitating humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, but it's many of those same partners condemning its decision to ban UNRWA. Mitch McCann, CGTN, New York.
Deja is monitoring developments inside the UN and has more on our top story. Deja.
So let me start with the tension between Israel and Iran. Last weekend, following the retaliation, Iran requested a Security Council meeting on this matter.
The responsibility for this dangerous escalation lies squarely with the Israeli regime and certainly with those who enable it, foremost among them the United States, which remain Israeli primary and unwavering supporter in committing these grave atrocities and also paralyze this august body to fulfill the primary responsibilities.
How can you equate Israel's defensive measures with Iran's unprovoked assaults on our people? This is not just morally bankrupt, it is a grotesque distortion of reality. The failure to hold Iran accountable is an endorsement of their tactics. This Council's silence in the face of Iran's aggression sends a message to Tehran that its actions will go unchecked, that it may continue down this path without consequence.
Also in Middle East, Israeli Knesset passed 2 bills that would ban the operation of UN's Palestine Refugee Agency, UNRWA. UN quickly released a statement concerning this decision. But what options does the UN really have if the bills are implemented?
I would tell you the UNRWA's mandate was given to it by the General Assembly. The General Assembly isn't the General Assembly. The General Assembly is 193 member states. So we very much appreciate efforts by any member state to help us get over this hurdle, which is minimizing what this actually is.
But there's very limited options now for the Secretariat.
That would be a correct assessment.
Actually, when it comes to UNRWA, here is how Israeli Ambassador Denis Denou answering my question on northern Gaza.
You know, UNRWA was infiltrated by Hamas many years ago. We have won the Security Council. That is why today we are taking action that will limit UNRWA capabilities to continue to function in Israel. And we will continue to work with those UN organs that want to support humanitarian efforts. And we are doing it with the WHO, with UNICEF, on the polio vaccination campaign and other campaigns.
But obviously, members of the Security Council, even the closest ally of Israel, is against those bills.
Well, I mean, we've made very clear that we are opposed to those bills. And so we have made our views very clear to the Israeli authorities. So we would like to see we would like to see the implementation of these slowed as best as possible. It's obviously a decision for the Israeli government, but we are very, very concerned about the impact of these bills on the future of UNRWA.
But how to slow the process, we still have to see. Another issue for the past few weeks is the situation of UNIFIL, UN's peacekeeping mission in South Lebanon. UNIFIL has a liaison mechanism with both parties. Is that still working?
The liaison branch is really working day and night to try to deconflict all these activities, notifying the parties and doing whatever we can to ensure the safety of convoys, humanitarian convoys, and also of our peacekeepers.
It seems to me like it's only UNIFIL sending messages to the other parties. It's not the other way around. What message do they have to reply you?
Well, I think in this case, the messages that are going from on both sides is really from our side to deconflict activities. Sometimes we get a response that activities have been deconflicted, but as I said, it's not always the case.
And let's move to Ukraine. This week, reports suggest that Secretary General has been rejected by Ukraine to visit Kiev because of his visit to Kazan and meeting with President Putin of Russian Federation. Is that true?
Discussions were underway for a visit by the Secretary General to Ukraine, and we continue to be in touch with Ukrainian authorities.
Do you have a previous date, let's say previous schedule?
No.
Or because if he rejected it, that means there's
there was no.
So it's still continuing,
yeah.
the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's all from me, Elaine.
Shudaja, thanks. For more than a year, conflict has raged in Sudan. The fighting has escalated in the North Darfur region in recent weeks, and the human toll has been devastating. Hunger and disease are widespread, and the conflict has forced more than 10 million people to flee their homes.
The largest displacement crisis in the world, with more than 11 million people fleeing since April last year, including nearly 3 million who have crossed into neighboring countries.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda.
Carbon dioxide is accumulating in the atmosphere faster than at any time experienced during human existence.
The World Meteorological Organization released a dire outlook on greenhouse gases. They have hit a record high. Experts say that will lead to higher global temperatures and more extreme climate events. The UN's Biodiversity Summit is winding down in Cali, Colombia. Negotiators are trying to reach landmark agreements on funding to preserve species and ecosystems. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. General Assembly President Philemon Yang is visiting Beijing. He met with the UN's resident coordinator in China. The trip comes at the invitation of China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
Coming up.
Without doubt, the blockade is the main obstacle for the development of Cuba.
UN Insider.
Ningún país. No other country in the world, not even those whose economies are far more robust than the Cuban economy, could cope with such a brutal, asymmetric, and long-standing aggression without a considerable cost for the living standards of its population.
Every year for more than 3 decades, the UN General Assembly has voted in favor of a resolution that calls for an end to the U.S. embargo on Cuba. The policy has stood for more than 60 years and has had a devastating impact on the Caribbean island. I sat down with Cuba's ambassador to the UN, Ernesto Soberon. Ambassador Soberon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Elaine. It's my pleasure to be here with you today.
For more than 3 decades, the United Nations has consistently approved resolutions that support ending the U.S. embargo against Cuba. You call it the economic blockade. What makes this recent General Assembly presentation, this resolution, different than in years past?
This year, we have a particular, that there is we are not only talking about the embargo or the blockade that you want to call, but also about the list of state of sponsor of terrorism. So the combination of the impact of both of these, it's made worse for the Cuban people, their life, Just to give you an example, as a result, as a Cuban was included in this list, where everybody knows that don't supposed to be, 320,000 European citizens have been seeing how the U.S. government canceled their ESTA visa, the electronic visa to come to the U.S., just because they visited Cuba as a tourist. So that means that some of our neighbors in the Caribbean region, they have already recovered the number of tourists that they received before COVID, but Cuba didn't. Why? Because as a result of this policy and those new restrictions. We are now going through a very difficult situation. I am pretty sure that you heard about the situation right now with the energetic system in Cuba. We have suffered a blackout. I was just looking some numbers few days ago, and the cost of 18 days of blockades means all the money that we need to buy part for our plants and the money that we need also to buy fuel for our plants. So we are not telling that the blockade is the only reason of our problems, but without doubt, the blockade is the main obstacle for the development of Cuba.
To go back a little bit, can you explain for our audience what you mean, because they might not realize what being on the list of state-sponsored terrorism means.
So if you are a member, if you are included in the list of a sponsor of terrorism, the financial institution, the banks, they cannot make deals with you. So we have the blockade that impede those transactions, and at the same time, we have the impact of the list of a sponsor of terrorism. But another, as I mentioned already before, it has other consequences.
Do you feel that the United Nations and its multilateral system is the best way to end the embargo, the blockade?
The majority of the international community is against the embargo. The majority of the international community recognize that the embargo is not only an issue between the US and Cuba, but also has extraterritorial impact. And we think that this is very important too, because at the end of the day, the embargo, to lift the embargo, we need that the US government do something different what they have done since the very beginning. The president of the US, he has also the power to do a lot of things, not to lift the embargo, but at least to make easier the life for the Cuban people.
We are in the middle of a pretty devastating hurricane season in the Atlantic. Cuba recently saw impacts from Hurricane Oscar. So what do you hope comes out of this year's COP29 in Azerbaijan?
We have been talking a lot about the necessity to finance the climate change, and not to compete or to use the same financiation in terms of development and in terms of climate change. We need some amount of financial just for climate change, and some from the right to development. We have a very high concern in terms of the sea level rising. It's also a challenge for small countries. We are also requesting that a high level of cooperation with the developing countries in terms of not only to climate change, but also to climate adaptation, because it's very important for the developing countries too. So we think that the 29 COP could be a new step to move forward in that regard.
Your foreign minister during UNGA high-level week in September was pretty dire when it came to the Sustainable Development Goals. He said the aspiration for achieving them has all but vanished. I would like to ask you where you think Cuba might be making some progress on achieving its Sustainable Development Goals.
Just 17% of these SDG are maybe we will achieve them. The rest, the 83%, it will be not reachable on the 2030 agenda. So that, and we think that it is very important to try to push this and to try to use as much as we can the political will to try to reach the SDG goals. Cuba has been working very hard on the G77 and China group, on the non-alignment movement also, in order to try to establish some different kind of cooperation with developing countries and try to help as much as possible in terms of the health situation in different countries, education, climate change, and other issues that are covered by the SDG.
Ambassador, Cuba and China relations go back several decades. How would you describe ties at the moment?
We have an excellent relation with China. It's a historical relation. We have a large number of projects of cooperation. We have a very important also foreign trade. we have also similar views in terms of how we can face some of the challenge that we face. We have also a lot of Cuban students in China, a lot of Chinese students in Cuba, and I think that we are like, a big and small brothers. We are also looking to help each other. We have some joint venture projects also in Cuba, but also in China. So we are not we are not a bigger economy. We are not a big country in terms of population, but we think that we have a lot of opportunities in terms of help each other here in the UN. We have a very fluid communication, a high level of coordination in terms of international policy. We agree on a lot of international issues, and we support each other.
Ambassador Ernesto Sobron, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome, and thank you for having me here today and give me the opportunity to talk about these different issues. Thank you very much.
Coming up.
Our Secretariat building, the high-rise, is the prototype of the modern high-rise building. It was the first building with this kind of a glass facade.
UN Insider.
All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
United Nations headquarters consists of 4 main buildings. The complex lies on more than 7 hectares of land along New York's East River. The facility hosts more than 8,000 meetings every year. The United Nations is a one-of-a-kind institution, and it is headquartered in a one-of-a-kind building. An exhibit here in New York tells a story of how this groundbreaking landmark came to be through photos and records that date back nearly 8 decades.
The exhibition, A Workshop for Peace, tells the story of how the UN headquarters was designed and built and preserved. We felt that, the visitors should know lots of the details that went into the creation of this architectural masterpiece. It was a very successful project and a very successful collaboration between great architects from 10 different countries. One, Liu Zizhong from China, Le Corbusier from France, Oscar Niemeyer from Brazil. Those were very, very bright minds, and they did what the United Nations is trying to do every day. They came together, they had a task, and they brought the best ideas to that task, and they created a new, very innovative headquarters for this new organization, United Nations. Our Secretariat building, the high-rise, is the prototype of the modern high-rise building. It was the first building with this kind of a glass facade. The General Assembly building, the conference building, is the prototype of the modern conference center and convention center with big halls that were designed for simultaneous interpretation, for example, for TV, for recording everything. The UN headquarters is much smaller than most people probably think it is. A structure that leads people together. If you are a diplomat, if you are a delegate, you cannot avoid constantly meeting and bumping into delegates from other countries. The UN headquarters needed to be renovated because whether it's a one-family home that you may own or a big headquarters building, the building systems are usually designed only to really work well for 30 or 40 years. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, all these things. The facade, the glass facade of the Secretariat building had big problems. In a storm, we could have lost some parts of our facade. In 2008, we began the renovation, and it turned out to be a $2.15 billion project, paid for by our member states. We were only 10% over budget. We completed in 2016, and we were only half a year over our completion date. So for a construction or renovation project of such a magnitude, it was a very successful project. Our headquarters building was and still is very innovative, and we are very proud that we are able to preserve it and let it be a symbol of what this organization stands for many, many years to come.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our part.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.